Hello, thank you for tuning in. It's your friend Gar, and what I am working on, or starting to work on today, it'll all be obviously in one video by the time you watch it, but I have decided to make a Chrono Mag. So, hello to my kitty cat. Chrono Mag being a Nerf Kronos that has been modded to take short darts instead of rival balls. So part of the reason, honestly a main amount of the reason that I've decided to do this is because of how nice these Chrono Mags are. These 3D printed mags for half darts. This is a brilliant design, and I intend to probably print more of these. In addition to the regular base, I've also printed some of the flat base that lets it go inside and remove this kind of end cap. Makes it more svelte, but I think it's going to take up a little more room at the bottom. It may not really matter, and I think you have to glue this one, whereas this one friction fits. I haven't fully decided yet, but we'll see. Anyway, so this is the start of the Chrono Mag build. Now, the crux of this build is going to be the Chrono Mag Kit by user MyVenom. This will be linked in the description, obviously. So I've already printed the kit. Now, his version 2 kit leverages parts from Tungsten EXE's mag adapter. So, so far, what we have is the actual lever part of the mag, or sorry, the mag well / mag adapter. This is the lever. I'll be honest, I intend to probably only use Chrono Mags or a 3D printed mag, and for the most part, all of the 3D printed mags that I'm seeing seem to be katana based rather than Talon. So for the time being, I have opted to not include the Talon release bar, release tooth that the whole kit includes. So far what I've done is I printed basically everything else. We have the Tungsten EXE version of the kit is actually leveraging waffle head darts as springs, which I find positively brilliant. What I'm working on right now is this lid is currently not going on to the base super flush, mostly because of this whole area here. There's supposed to be an indentation in the piece here, and I guess it's just not big enough. So I'm kind of trying to work that out a little bit, and then soon enough, this lever release will slide into here and get locked in with some very small pegs that were also printed. I have done some cleaning up of this print, and probably the most useful thing to do was when I just took some 17 seconds brass and jammed it in there. This fits pretty loosely now. The holes are probably not the best cleaned up as far as 3D prints go, but at the same time they don't really have to be. So, and I've also tested that the Chrono Mags fit nicely into this mag well, and they do. You can hear that obvious sign of 3D printed stuff. But that's unavoidable with 3D printed stuff. And they go up just perfectly. That's exactly where you would want the dart lined up. Something like that. I haven't figured out all the details yet, so I'll be filming this in segments, and we will figure out the details as we go. That's it for now. Alright, so apologies for the 3D printer noises in the background, but that thing's been going pretty much non-stop, and it's right over there, so we're going to hear it. Anyway, so a quick update on the status of this project. At this point, I think I'm really only going to use Chrono Mags because I have a 3D printer. They're extremely economical to print, and I really like how well they work. I love the design. And so I'm going to forego the Talon part of this adapter. So the way this adapter works is, or the way the magazine release works, is you have a lever right here. You have this lever, and it has two tabs which operate two separate releases at the same time. So the lower one is for a Talon mag, and the upper one is for a Katana mag. And it seems, I'm actually a little surprised, but it seems that no one, for the most part, is designing 3D printable Talon mags, so whatever, but Katana is quite nice. So I'm going to get around to assembling it. Now this is a tool for helping you to insert that piece, and the way this works is this, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, probably not. There are two open slots in the mag piece that correspond to these two. And what this does is this bump here will insert into the lower tab, because as you slide it in, the Katana lever wedge, the Katana wedge, is going to naturally spring into the first one, and this basically plugs that hole so that you cannot do that. So we'll insert that and essentially hold it in place. I have the circular piece here sanded enough that this piece as a whole can be safely inserted. Now obviously if I later change my mind and want Talon compatibility, I will be kicking myself, but hopefully it'll never come to that. So I'm holding this in with my thumb. Gotta push that in. Oh, and I cut the heck out of my hand, so whatever. I'm an idiot, so we're just going to push that in, I hope. Unlike most times when I'm normally sitting at the workbench, I'm standing for no particular reason, but you should at least be able to hear me better. I don't know if the waffle tips that I used are simply too springy. This is having a beast of a time getting this wedge compressed enough to actually fit in there. So I may cut the video and come back when I've managed to fit it inside. Alright, using a screwdriver I was able to depress that Katana compatible wedge. So now it's time to insert this. This whole piece should theoretically slide in. Alright, it's not going in yet. After some trial and error, the lever piece has been inserted, and it's in there pretty tightly. You might be able to see the wedge, well, it's all in black, so probably not. You might be able to see the wedge poking out of the top hole. Now the real test will be, can these Katana mags fit in there tightly enough that the wedge will hold them, and then will it release them properly? I did previously test that they sat just perfectly in it when you insert them without that piece. Oh boy. It is not catching. That's bad. Bummer. Just absolutely not catching at all. Just falls right out. You have to hold it down, but not good so far. Maybe this works better with the dart heads on the original version of this design, which was for strifes. However, that wedge is not catching this magazine at all. Bummer. So I'm going to have to remove that if possible and start over. Fortunately, I was able to remove the lever section. Now I don't know if this was intentional in the design, but my Venom included this slot here. So when you have this whole lever section inserted, I want to be able to make sure I get that out. But just for demonstration, when this is inserted, the back of the lever section is visible in this gap. And so in conjunction with using the test piece to depress the button, I was also able to insert a screwdriver here for leverage, because solely pulling on the handle I don't think would have been enough or would have broken this lever. So I was able to remove this. I am just going to use a normal spring here. So far in quick testing it seems to work well. I don't know what this spring is from, but it is just a small spring, and if you're like me, you probably have a growing bin of them. So this could be from any number of blasters that I've disassembled. It's relatively small, but the way I'm looking to assemble this currently is this spring will simply be sitting there. I may apply a dab of super glue to get it to stick to things, but my katana piece will go there. My katana wedge, I'm certain I will use a tad of super glue to hold that. Insert this, and what I'm seeing already so far is, when we place this together, this is basically sprung out as far as it can go, although it's a little off-kilter because my spring is not centered, which is why I want to glue it. And when we go in, it goes in far enough, comes out as far as it possibly can while still being latched on the lever's tip here. Additionally, I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but I don't think that this helper piece is in my Venom's kit. I had to go to Tungsten's Strife Adapter kit to print just this piece. That's not really a big deal. I will include a link to the Tungsten kit as well. Alright, unfortunately, I'm running into an issue where what's happening with the mag release is, right now it looks fine, but due to the way that pressure from the lever is only exerted on one side of the katana release, or the katana wedge, let's call it, what's happening is the spring tension from behind is making it, you can see that right now, it's making it turn sideways, and that's mucking up the entire mag release process. So even if I put this on flushly, there's still a bit of sideways wiggle room on the wedge, and that is causing me issues. So I'm going to try, I'm not really much of a CAD person, but I'm going to essentially Tinkercad this, and I'm probably going to add about 1 millimeter to the width. I think I'll start with 1 millimeter, and that will probably, I hope 1 millimeter is just right where it can still slide freely, but it won't have this back and forth quality. So the printer's currently in use until tomorrow. Well, this will all be in one video obviously by the time you're watching it, but the printer's in use, and so to be continued. The most recent status, because I am filming this in parts. Alright, so I have assembled the Chrono Mag Magwell adapter piece. The original katana piece that I printed I felt was not wide enough because it wiggled around back and forth too much and it came at an angle. And unfortunately with the waffle dart head I wasn't getting the right amount of compression. So I'm using an actual metal spring left over from some blaster disassembly in here, and this works pretty well. This catches pretty well. It actually went up further than it was supposed to, but usually they stop where they're supposed to. This is pretty good. I'm satisfied. I'll be honest, I don't know if this is due to tolerances of my printer or due to the fact that the Tungsten EXE Magwell was remixed to make this, but basically I have a fair amount of wiggle room sideways in here with the little box. If I could get a hold of it. You probably can't see it, but there's a little bit of a gap. It is not a big deal, but it contributed to the issue I was having with the width of the wedge. I don't think it'll be an issue. Now the other thing that I've done is I printed out some of the pegs that were part of the Tungsten EXE design, and interestingly, again, I don't know if this is due to printer tolerances or what, but they were too big, so I had to kind of trim them down. But so I have the 3 pegs in here that were put there just to keep this mechanism in place for moving up and down. This is looking pretty good. I don't know why that's sliding up so far. Let's try the other one. This one, maybe they always slide up. But it's pretty good. I don't think that'll be a problem when it's actually assembled. Now, as to the next things to do will be to worry about things like barrels and pushers. I have your standard K&S brass tubing, 17/32 and 9/16 sizes, and 13, yeah, whatever. This is, what, about a foot or so. On the My Venom Thingiverse page, he recommends that the pusher be 4 1/4 inches. So this is the piece that is intended to serve as my pusher. So it'll go somewhere about here. It will need to be affixed to the plunger tube once I have the Kronos open. And then we'll be having some other combination of 9/16 with, I think what I'm probably going to do is just use the remaining section of this initial foot long to as a barrel. Since I do not have a real chronograph, I can't really judge how good this is going to be, but I think it'll be sufficient. So it's going to look something like this, very roughly. We'll figure that out, and I don't think that the piece of 9/16 brass that you use for a sleeve, I don't think that that piece is set in stone. It sounds like it's variable. So I may go with about 4 to 6 inches. I am not sure. The other thing that I've decided is that I have this, this is a muzzle brake designed by Gem State Designs, and this fits beautifully on your standard, I mean, it was simply made to go on a standard end strike attachment, and of course it works with that. And what I've decided to do is I have a remix of this that is longer. Essentially it's just 2 of these pasted together, and that's going to be a basic barrel in white filament, and then I'm going to put this on the end of that, kind of like this, and I think that'll look decent. Don't know, hard to know in advance, but that is the current plan. You, of course, will be getting the video all at once and won't have to wait, but I have to wait. In particular, as I'm talking, I have only ordered the white filament, but it hasn't arrived yet, so here we go. Alright, it is the time in this build when we need to start disassembling the blaster that's going to be used, so let's do that. One of these days perhaps I'll get an electric screwdriver, but not today. Alright, so I've pretty much taken this apart. The T-pull that I've chosen to use does not utilize, or omits, or however you want to phrase it, these slidey pieces and the priming indicator. I don't know if we're going to want to put back in the delete, or the, not the delete door, but the original loading door. I might just do that for aesthetics. But for now, those pieces are out of the way. I'm taking out the half prime lock. I'm taking out the trigger lock because I'm not going to be needing any of that. This T-pull, honestly, the design looks amazing. I love how it friction fits, and it feels incredible. So, what we're working with is we have our original, what would you call this? Barrel breech? I don't know. Plunger tube, whatever this part is. And the directions indicate that you're supposed to take the air restrictor out of this whole mechanism, which I don't even know how that's going to go, but hopefully it will somehow. And we're going to be adding our 4 1/4 inch pusher to that somehow. So we'll see how that goes, and should also get a feel for how this fits. I'm certain some shell cutting is necessary, but hopefully not too much. So the AR itself is spring-loaded, and that's going to pop right out. But the question is how to separate these pieces. I'm not seeing it. I don't know if these are actually glued together or what. But we want to end up with just having this ring, the orange ring with the O-ring there, is my understanding. The AR unscrews. I think it will be to my advantage to remove this O-ring for now as I work with this plastic, just so I don't damage that O-ring. I think that's glued on though. Alright, I'm not really seeing any other way, so I think we're going to have to cut this, whether with a hacksaw or a Dremel. So, here goes that. Alright, this is interesting to me. I have removed this part of the AR from the rest of the magazine mechanism. And the interesting thing here is there's an indentation here where the AR went, but that indentation is basically the perfect size for 1732 brass. In fact, this just, it's obviously wouldn't stay through actual usage, but it fits perfectly. It even stays on for a friction fit. So I think the next steps are going to be mixing up a 2-part epoxy and filling in the gap there so that this air won't escape. And then the nice thing here is this will nestle here. It doesn't even need the plunger rod to stop. It just kind of sits in there, and we're going to want to affix that permanently as well. Because that doesn't. Yeah, we're not going to want these to separate once this is all assembled. And I think the other thing we're going to do is there's a bit of dead space on the front of the plunger head. So I'm probably either going to fill that in with hot glue, or initially I'm leaning in the direction of padded foam or craft foam. Like this kind of stuff. You can just get a sheet of this for $1 at Michael's. Although this is 1/4 inch foam that I have, and it won't actually, it would fill some of the dead space, but it wouldn't fill all of it. So I might do 2 layers of this foam, or maybe a layer of this foam combined with some hot glue there to hold it in. That might work. But yeah, we'll eliminate that dead space. I'm going to epoxy this piece together, and I guess we'll go from there. That's what it's looking like right now. Oh, and we should probably talk about how this will look when it is all together. That pusher goes forward to about there. The My Venom kit is going to sit roughly there, and yeah, we're looking something like that. So we'll see. Okay, so one of the things we're going to have to do is to cut a shape out of the bottom of the Kronos here, and I think what I'm going to do for that is basically figure out how this lines up position-wise exactly, and then I'm actually just going to use, since I already assembled this portion here, I'm going to use this just a regular mag as a baseline. They're not exactly the same footprint, but they are fairly close. The Chrono Mag is larger, but so this way at least I should be able to get just kind of a baseline of how much material I'm removing. So I'm probably going to just trace that in a Sharpie and Dremel it out. Okay, this is a very rough outline of what it looks like we have to cut out from the bottom of the Kronos to get the My Venom magwell to fit. It's not too terrible. I think it'll still friction fit after it's cut and when it's inserted. I'm certain that we'll do something to make this magwell adhere to the inside, this side of the shell. We don't want it wobbling around in there. One thing I will note is if you look at the magwell, there's kind of like a little foot here, and if I'm seeing it correctly, that little hole will allow us to still use this screw hole here. So and then this foot, this L shape at the bottom, is actually going to be on the outside. So that should line up just about perfectly. So that's why initially I made a dot here, then I moved it to over here. If you're wondering, hey, isn't he going to have Sharpie all over the bottom of his blaster? Sharpie comes off pretty easily with rubbing alcohol or with a dry erase board spray. Alright, so here's a quick update. I was working for, I don't know, probably more than an hour on fitting the Chrono magwell into the shell. This Kronos shell is completely gutted for now, but I don't know. I think I'm missing something because I can't get it to fit really well. I can technically get this to close, but you'll see here this really wants to pop apart. So I'm glad I left the screw port because I can technically screw it together, but it's going to constantly be under stress. That is not desirable. So I don't know if the magwell is just slightly too big, or if my my modification of the shell is inadequate, but this is not pleasing. I do wonder if maybe I should have gone with the version 1 of the My Venom kit rather than the version 2, because I'm not even really intending to use Talon mags, and this one has Talon. I didn't even put in the tooth for Talon mags here. But I do understand. I want to say that the version 1 doesn't have the N-Strike compatible barrel lug, so that's nice to have that anyway. What I'm probably going to do is basically add the plastic weld epoxy to it, screw it just on the one side where everything kind of sits, screw it together to let that dry, and then just hope for the best. Because I want to be able to take it apart to change the spring out or something, but man, this just does not... I don't know, I think the main trouble area is in the front bottom section here, but I do not know I do not know what I am doing wrong. One thing I did not note earlier is in the same way there's kind of a tooth here that steps below the frame, there's also this tooth should, the tooth in the back should sit below the frame too. I don't know. It almost seems like this whole ridge from here should sit outside the frame, and I tried that on the one side, and I cut the heck out of this frame. But I tried that, and it did not help, because it still will not quite sit flush with the frame. You can see, wow, I cut that way too high. There's a gap here between that ledge and where I cut. So that's going to be a massacred shell. And if I was to do this again, I would not do that. But it's still, this one doesn't even want to fit quite right. This piece should be more straight, but it's kind of crooked. I don't know. If I was willing to completely lose this bottom screw port, I think it would fit okay if I just went and cut right over. But then I want that, I want that screw port for support. I don't think it's going to hold together to my liking without this screw port. But I don't know if that's what's doing me in. Unfortunately, the far side, the top or whatever you want to call it, it's even bigger than this side because this has it's wider because it's the outer part of the screw port. So I'm sure I'll get at least 200, haha, that's a joke, 200 comments on this video when I publish it saying, "Here's what you did wrong, you dummy." But no, that's not likely. So we'll see. That's the most recent update. Okay, the spring I've decided to go with for this mod for now. I have a long shot 14 kg spring on order, but that's from NF Strike, and who knows how many weeks or months I'll be waiting for it. So this is just your run-of-the-mill K26. I have something like 12 1/4 coils, and that's just because I bought one of the segments from Out of Darts that was pre-cut. They're like $1.50 for this much K26. I wanted to give it a shot. I have confirmed that it does catch with this. Another quick update. Oh, and in addition to deciding on the spring, I did what I mentioned before, which is I cut a segment of foam padding here, and then I filled the inside of the plunger with about halfway with hot glue, and then put this on. So this is on pretty tight. This will give it a little bit of cushioning, but it'll also kill the dead space. And the other update that it should be visible in frame, I have mixed my 2-part epoxy, and that is currently curing, or whatever you want to call it, in the air restrictor cylinder. I've made sure that it is perfectly straight. This particular epoxy takes something like 3 hours to get relatively firm. Maybe more like 2, but it's a while. But we're going forward as planned, and I think the next thing that I'm going to do is basically cut myself a section of 9/16 brass and start trying to line this up. In my initial testing, I think I want the 9/16 brass to be roughly even with the inside lip of this. And what My Venom indicated in the build notes for this is basically he has a middle segment of 9/16 brass, the pusher is 17/32, and then the barrel is also 17/32. And what he's suggesting is that you have basically the barrel of 17/32 is going to come in just enough so that when you close the pusher, that it will push a dart into the front section of 17/32. That might take a little while to get lined up. I'm probably going to wrap this in electrical tape to start, just so I can still move it some, but so that it's relatively firm in there. And the main question right now is how long of a segment of 9/16 to use. Probably go with like 4 inches, but that might be more than I need. That's probably a lot more than I need. Maybe I'll go with like 3. I mean, this section is only... Probably don't need it to be any longer than 3 inches or so. Yeah, I think I'll wait to cut the 9/16 until the epoxy that's in the pusher hardens, and then I can confirm just how far up this is going to push. That ought to be good. But right now I'm predicting about 3 inches of 9/16. Now I am filming this over the course of several days, and by the time I'm done it may be more than a week all told. So I apologize if I'm repeating myself in progress notes. Here is the latest, however. I have epoxied the 4 1/4 inch 1730, the 4 1/4 inch this way of 17/32 brass into the what's left of the AR. I have used my Dremel to widen the hole here so that more air can flow into said brass, and I have actually sanded down the magwell a bit, and I think it actually fits pretty well now. Unfortunately, my original intention with this, in part, was to make kind of a guideline for where to cut when you're doing this, where to cut in the Kronos, and I have failed miserably at that. This is kind of what it looks like now. Now, right off the bat, this side has been cut way too much, but I wasn't sure how much I needed. It's not really a functional amount of material missing, like this isn't really going to help, but it's mostly going to look awkward, but you know, it'll still work fine. And you'll note that these two are different lengths, since there's a kind of a foot on the back of that the magwell will sit around. You can go a little shorter on that side, and let's see, yeah, that's about it. I have taken out most of the lock type things from this blaster, so there's no trigger lock here. There's going to be nothing preventing you from de-priming it by pulling the priming handle back and gradually easing it forward after you press the trigger. Now, one of the things to note is that even when the blaster is primed, this is still going to move relatively freely. I mean, that's part of being able to de-prime it, but it does move pretty freely. I'm just not going to worry about it too much. So far, this T-pull is magnificent, and I love it. So, next steps are including the following. I'm going to use some plastic bonder to adhere this piece into here. That might not be necessary, but I have noticed in my testing that sometimes when I prime it back, this piece would remain here like that, simply because of the friction between the two gauges of brass. I have decided that, well, not decided, I've determined that I want the brass, the 9/16 to be in about this much into this line is how far it goes into the 3D printed part, and that line is about an inch and about an inch and a half, inch and what is that? 9/16. However, I'm going to make this segment longer than that, probably, like I was saying before, probably on the order of 3 or 4 inches. And I'm going to experiment with different barrel lengths because the friction on those will be high enough that essentially I can hold them in while I'm firing the blaster, and it'll still fire. My two leading candidates for barrel length right now of 17/32 brass are what was left after I cut this section, and this is what, 7 3/4 inches, or this is a full foot. And keeping in mind there's currently a K26 spring in here right now. As I mentioned, you'll notice this area of the blaster is fairly empty. I mean, all that's really going to go there is the catch and the plunger rod itself, and that's about it. So I will cut back into the video after I have bonded that in there, and I'm going to be working more on the brass coming up. It is now the next day, and here's the latest update. Alright, I decided on 3 inches of 9/16 brass for the front, in part because I like whole numbers, so sue me, and 4 inches seemed like too much, honestly. This will give me a fair amount of overlap on the pusher and on the 17/32 that will be the actual barrel. Now, this line that I've drawn here on the 9/16 is how far it's going to go in, and as I just mentioned, it will overlap with the pusher some amount. I don't actually know how much, but it's enough. And then the other thing that I did is I took, this is my remainder after the pusher, and what I did is I drew a line on here, and this is essentially how far it needs to go into the 9/16 brass such that the back of the dart pushed in is just inside it, which is basically what my Venom suggested. If I understood the comment correctly, it was basically when the pusher pushes the dart, which comes up to about here, incidentally, then you want it to be such that the dart tip, or rather the foam of the dart, is just inside the brass, and that will get it about maybe just under a centimeter into the brass if I put the 1730 seconds in up to there. I don't know if it's just supposed to be just touching. It may not really matter. I'll be honest, I would think that you could have the barrel of 1730 seconds basically pressing up against the pusher, but I'm not going to do that because of the suggestion of the maker of this kit. Alright, so I'm going to start out with this, and but I think we are otherwise basically done. So the tricky parts for me were deciding what to do for the pusher. I mean, it was basically spelled out, but there seemed to be more than one piece of information. Getting this 3D printed kit to fit, you can still see I have a little bit of a crack there in the shell. I might actually take another entire bolt, drill through both sides, and just, if I have a bolt with a screw, and just hold it shut there, because I don't think that'll really interfere with my holding the blaster, and I'd probably feel better about having this closed. I did use some plastic bonder to essentially along this whole inside edge on what I'm calling the bottom of the shell when it's opened up, the side without the screw holes. So all along here is plastic bonded to between 3D printed part and the shell. I am using Loctite epoxy plastic bonder. I believe most people usually think of this as DEFCON plastic weld, but it has the methyl methacrylate, which is, to hear r/Nerf talk about it, the key ingredient. So I think we're basically done, and I am ready to start reassembling things and also start running some tests. As I mentioned, I'm actually going to try it with both the remainder barrel and the full 1 foot. Now for now, I'm going to be starting out using a K26 spring, but and since I don't really have a real chronograph, I might just use the chrono barrel and compare them because the higher number is better, even if they're inaccurate because of half darts. And alternately, I might just do some distance tests. If you are still here, thank you for sticking it out. So here we are with the conclusion. I just got back from doing some rudimentary range testing. It would be nice to have more options to test between 7 3/4 inches and 12 inches, but I don't know what I'm going to use the brass for in the future, so I don't want to cut the really long one. Anyway, for the K26 spring, between these two, the 7 3/4 section seems to be the better of the two lengths. Depending on finances and availability in the future, I may revisit that. We'll see. I think I read a comment that suggested that 9 inches was an optimal length, but then I read another comment that said 12 inches was, so I don't know. I think in part it's going to depend on your spring load. Keeping in mind, I do have a K26 here. I do have a 14 kg long shot spring on order from NF Strike. That may arrive someday, and I will probably revisit it then. But for now, K26 between these two lengths, the shorter one is the winner. Now, I just wanted to go over some of the measurements in case you're trying to do this at home, because that was the main thing that was catching me. Alright, I'm sure I already mentioned this, but the segment of brass that is epoxied into the pusher, or the segment that is the pusher that's epoxied into the AR, is 4 1/4 inches long, 4.25. Then I have this small sleeve of 9/16 brass. This one was 1730 seconds. The sleeve of 9/16 brass is 3 inches long as I chose it. This is variable, honestly. You could probably get by with shorter. You could definitely have a longer segment, but I know this one works because you get some inclusion of both sections on each side. And then I have inserted this one essentially far enough in that the pusher goes into it, but at the same time it goes onto the pusher far enough to get a seal, but it doesn't interfere with the darts. The mark I have on here for how far to push it in is 1 5/8 inches into. That's 1 5/8 inches in from the front of the blaster. So that means it's a little more than halfway in, and a little less than half of it is sticking out like this. Now I will be permanently adhering that, but for the purposes of these tests I wanted to not do that yet. So I have 1 3/8 inches sticking out, 1 5/8 inches in here, and then the other measurement I wanted to provide is this marker, which I put on both barrels that I was testing. This marker is 1 13/16. Yeah, 1 13/16 inches, and this measurement is for how far the barrel goes into the 9/16. Again, since I'm not a proper YouTube channel, as Ed Scar would say, and I don't have a real chronograph, I don't know how hard this is shooting, but it definitely packs a punch, and I am very much looking forward to using it in the war. I may potentially put well, I don't own a Scar barrel, but I may look into getting one. So we'll see. Alright, that should wrap this video up. Thank you so much for watching, and I will hope to see you again in the future.